Cheta was a lonely and pathetic loser, but his life suddenly changed after his dad got remarried and brought in stepsisters that refused to give up on their dream to clap him. This story starts back when Cheta was still in elementary school and almost got mauled by dogs. After Akko and Rico chased the dogs away, he thanked them, and on the way home, they told him that he would have to start standing up for himself. He asked if they would stop protecting him, but they promised to always stay by his side and gave him a kiss on each cheek. At the time, he is sleeping in class and keeps dreaming about them until he gets attacked and sees Tota fuming with two other classmates. They tell him how lucky he is to have two hotties as his stepsisters and ask if they are the ones keeping him up at night. He denies indulging in such activities, but after school, he goes back home and is greeted by kisses from both of them. They get on their knees to properly welcome him home, and Rico goes a step further by flashing her melons. Akko pulls her shirt down and tells her to have some decency. But then she also gets upset with Cheta for looking and says it's not fair. She says he also has to see hers and proceeds to flash him, but he ignores her mini melons and starts going to his room, so Rico tells her to consider getting implants. He is in the bath moments later and keeps thinking about what happened until his little Johnny starts to tingle in the water. While Akko whips up some food for him, Rico's dark side starts to take over, but she takes her anger out on an innocent cucumber. Akko tells her to get a grip and says she has to do laundry before leaving her in the kitchen. She gets to Cheta's room and starts looking through his things until she finds a boxer and starts thinking about his Magnum sausage. Rico catches her in the act, but she still tries to deny it until Rico pulls out another boxer and lets her sniff. Akko realizes that it isn't a regular boxer, so Rico tells her that she got fresh with Cheta's juices, and they both start fighting over it until the food starts burning. At the dinner table, Akko apologizes for messing up the food, and Rico tries to save the day by feeding him some Coke, but Rico also starts trying to force the burnt stew down his throat until he asks for their parents. They tell him that they both went on a trip, so he asks when they will be back, but the girls explain that they are going to be home alone for a day or two. Cheta gets to his room later on and wonders what he is going to do about the parent-teacher conference before squeezing and throwing the paper away. He gets into bed to sleep. Later that night, he wakes up feeling something heavy and sees both of them. They start leaning in, and he asks what they are trying to do, so they tell him they are trying to keep him warm. He tells them to stop, but then he realizes that they tied him up and starts to squirm. Akko turns on his flashlight, and Rico releases one of his hands for a melon squeeze. He freaks out, but after waking up in the morning, he thinks it's a dream and feels relief until he sees them asleep beside him and realizes that they actually broke down the door. They start turning on his flashlight again, so he runs out to get to school while they both regret not popping his cherry when they had the chance. Rico goes to take out his trash, but then she sees the parent-teacher conference letter, and they both suddenly get an extremely cultured idea. During gym class that morning, Cheta takes a break from running to catch his breath, but then Mikazuki runs into him and gives him a towel. She commends him for exercising while his mates study for their desired high schools before asking if he has gotten a recommendation already. He tells her that he has, so she promises to get into the same high school with him and asks if she can keep being his manager. The bell for classes goes off, so she wishes him luck and lets him have a peek at her rice cakes before running off. Later on, Akko and Rico are in class thinking about the letter that came with the recommendation for him to get into a high school different from theirs. They both dream about being in the same high school with him and tell their teachers that they have to leave school early. After classes, Cheta decides to go for the conference meeting by himself, but the girls get to the school just in time and agree to stop him from going to another school. Tota and every boy in school sees them coming in and starts running towards them, so Rico grabs Akko to escape. The boys start to catch up, so Rico kicks Tota away, but that only gets the rest of them excited, so the girls actually start running for their lives. Cheta is on his way down and sees the commotion, so he starts running to get there. At the time, Miharu is at her locker with some girls talking about Cheta's relationship with his sisters. Miharu imagines the kind of cultured activity they get up to at home, but Cheta tries to run out and bumps into her. By the time he realizes that his face was in her fish cakes, she starts squeezing him with her drumsticks, but he gets free and says he doesn't have time to eat before running out. By then, the boys have surrounded them and start asking for kisses, but he finally shows up, and the girls try to tell him why they came. He gets pissed and says they always cause a scene that makes things worse for him. But they try to tell him that they just wanted to help. He tells them to stop helping, so they apologize and start leaving. The boys tell him to stop being mean to them, but he refuses to listen and starts heading back inside until he sees the conference letter and realizes why they came. They start blaming themselves for always messing things up for him, but he catches up to them and apologizes for getting mad at them. They both hug him, but he pushes them away and tells them to stop being so touchy with him in public. When they get back home, their dad tells him to stop rejecting their love because they are not blood related. He tells Cheta to go all out and smash their rice cakes as much as he wants, but Cheta still tries to deny wanting to do anything of the sort, so they both give him kisses to shut him up. Days later, Cheta racks his empty brain trying to solve an equation, but Riko keeps unintentionally flashing her box, so he tries to get a closer look until she catches him. She asks if he needs help with the equation, and he tries to play it cool. But she leans in to help and starts pressing her melons into his arm and distracts him again. She tries to teach him, but he gets startled and falls off the chair. Earlier that day, they saw his poor test results, so he came clean about how his brain had lost all processing power because he fried it watching corn. Riko understood his problem, but Akko refused to accept it and said he had to get better so he could make it into their high school. She took his hand and promised to teach him, and he got excited to finally get some help. But Riko got pissed and said she also wanted to help him. Akko reminded her of the dice-rolling guess game she used to pass middle school that made her a class clown, so she kept quiet while Akko promised to help him get his grades up. After getting up, he asks why she has to dress like a teacher, so she tells him that it helps her get into character. Looking at her makes him remember the classroom fantasy scene he gooned to last night, and she realizes, so she starts trying to give him what he wants but stops herself and says they have to focus. They get back to studying and Riko sneaks up to check on them because she feels left out, but they get locked in, so she leaves. At dinner later on, their parents talk about how Akko has always had the brains in the family, so Riko asks why she didn't get the smart genes. Their dad tries to blame it on his side of the family, but Cheta reminds him that he isn't related to the girls by blood, which means that he is the one who actually got the negative IQ genes. Akko starts suggesting meals she wants to make for him, and Riko gets pissed off. She also wants to take care of him, but Akko tells her she has no skills that make her useful to him. Riko then says she is good at draining balls, and their parents get excited to watch as they both start arguing over whose head game is better. Around midnight, Cheta starts sleeping off, and Riko keeps trying to wake him up, but nothing works, so she pops open her melons, and they wake him up faster than a caffeine overdose. She finishes with the lecture, but during the test days later, all he remembers is her plot. He tells her about it on the way home, so she apologizes for distracting him and says she will try a different approach. That night, she switches to a regular dress, and he thinks she has finally stopped being a cultured psycho, but she shows him writing on her melon and says he has to read everything from her body. She gets on the table and spreads her drumsticks to show him the other sentences. On his way to class the next day, he keeps reminding himself of the special lesson and ends up pointing at Maharu's melons. He pokes them out of curiosity, but then she drops and starts yelling, which causes everyone to call him a creep. He tries to defend himself, but Mikazuki shows up and says he should have done it to her before showing him her melons. Back at home that evening, Akko congratulates him on passing the test before taking off the robe for a history lesson in her swimsuit, while Riko starts learning how to cook to become less useless. In class the next day, Toda and the boys ask Cheta for his secret, because they all know that he is too stupid to learn on his own. He tells them about the lessons with Akko. They ask for details, so he tells them about the first lesson, and Toda starts wishing God could make them swap bodies. The next evening, Yuzuki sees Riko washing an eggplant and feels proud to see that she is taking her duties seriously. Things take a dark turn when Riko takes out a cucumber and starts beating it at a dangerously high speed that leaves Yuzuki traumatized. The next day, Akko gets ready for another lesson, but this time she tells him it's time to learn the ways of men. She starts by teaching him how to use his tongue, but then he wakes up from the dream and feels bad for thinking about her in that way. He gets shocked to see her on the bed and asks how long she has been there. She says she didn't want to disturb his sleep and enjoyed watching him talk about his dreams. He gets ready for the lesson, but she tells him that it's going to be a test, and he starts complaining. She decides to reward him with a kiss if he passes, but he says he doesn't want to do that and ends up pissing her off. He tries to apologize, but she rejects it and says he has to kiss her if he fails even one of the questions. He tries to refuse, but she says he has no choice, so he decides to play along. He surprisingly keeps getting the answers correctly, so she decides to give him a question he can't answer, and finally makes him fail. She gets ready for the kiss, but he takes a while to think about it. He tells her it's only going to be a peck, but after a few seconds, things start getting steamy. She pushes him back and tells him not to leave a mark on her neck, so he grabs her to leave it in other places, but Rico separates them and asks if this is the lesson that they said she was too dumb to give. He tries to explain, but then she shows him the food she made and gets excited when he tells her to feed him. She gladly gives him the first spoon, but his digestive system rejects it, so he throws up on her face, and Akko tells her to stick to being a walking mannequin. He gets back the next day and tells them he passed the mock exam before running to thank Akko with a hug that leaves Rico feeling jealous again. Years ago, Cheta was still a sweet, innocent baby, but that all ended when his sisters introduced him to the art of kissing. He wakes up in bed and is greeted by Akko's lips until Rico pushes her away to get her turn with him. They both end up exchanging mouth juices with him until their morning breath brings him to the brink of death. He manages to get free from them, but they start arguing over who kisses best and end up pissing him off because they keep affecting his academic life with their cultured behavior. They offer him a kiss apology, but he brutally rejects them and decides to ban kissing completely. That night, Rico secretly watches with envy as Akko makes him dinner and takes it to him while he studies. She tries to steal a kiss, but he stops her and stands on business about the ban. Early the next day, he is in the bathroom getting ready with his dad, who asks about Akko's cooking and says he also wants some special attention from her. Cheta gets scared of him for a moment but starts talking about how he was actually hoping to try something sweet that wasn't made by Akko. Rico overhears them while emptying her bladder, so she goes to the library later on to get every book on sweets before terrorizing them all as she buys every sweet thing she can find. She gets to the kitchen later on and whips up an atrocity capable of ending all of humanity. She second guesses herself but still decides to get a taste that immediately summons the Grim Reaper. She survives the poisoning and thinks about asking Akko for help, but her pride gets the best of her, so she decides to keep finding a way to do it on her own. At school the next day, the girls share the snacks they baked in home economics class with their boyfriends, while Cheta and his boys watch in depression. They tell him to cheer up and remind him of the harem lord life he gets to live with his sisters at home, but he tells them that it's actually not as good as it looks. They are shocked by his claim of being tired of his sisters and make a promise to start having study sessions at his place, since he refuses to appreciate the love he gets from Akko and Rico. He tries to stop them, but then Mikazuki calls him and pulls out a chocolate banana that looks a lot like his Magnum sausage, but then Naru sees her and starts getting scared. She immediately tries to run away, but for some reason she ends up with chocolate jizz everywhere, and Mikazuki tells Cheta to try spraying her face with the real deal. That night, Rico makes a gut-wrenching bar of sweets and finally gives up on making it herself, but the thought of losing to Akko still bothers her, so she decides to just buy something. In class the next day, she finds something, but the price tag is way above her allowance, so she starts having a discussion with herself, which scares Yuzuki and the whole class. After school, she enters their dad's home office to steal some money, but then she sees his corn magazine and fantasizes about it for a minute before getting an idea. That night, Cheta tries to study, but he keeps getting distracted by his cultured thoughts and decides to give up. Rico suddenly shows up and nearly gives him a heart attack before handing him a lipstick. He opens it and sees that it's chocolate, so he compliments her on having that level of skill. He immediately senses foul play and says she couldn't have made it herself, but she claims she did and takes it from him to apply on her lips. She then tells him to taste it from her mouth, but he refuses and reminds her of the kissing ban. She tells him it's just chocolate and reveals that she overheard his wish to have something sweet. She gives him another chance to eat it off her lips, so he caves and starts putting his tongue to work. Akko snaps a cucumber as she senses something cultured happening. By then, Cheta finishes the first smear of chocolate, so he asks for another and makes Rico get on his thighs to make it easier. As things start getting steamy, Akko gets to the seal-off staircase and tries to climb up, but she gets soaked with oil and takes a bowling ball to the brain before getting caught with the tapes. While she struggles, Cheta and Rico keep going at it until the lipstick starts to thin out. She struggles to hide her desire, but then she sees that he is thinking the same thing. Making the first move is still too much for him, so she leans on his chest and tells him about when their Alabama love story started. She leans back and spreads for him to see. He thanks her and tries to start clapping, but Akko slams his head with a pan and knocks him out. She then checks out the lipstick and realizes what they have been up to, so they start begging to be spared. She nearly smashes Rico's skull and breaks the lipstick before storming out. He gets upset, but Rico gives him a second one that actually came from her chocolate of death. The next day, he gets to the roof at school to think about what happened last night and pulls out the lipstick for a little déjà vu. A single taste ruins his digestive system and summons the Grim Reaper to claim his latest victim. Days later, Rico searches through the house to find Cheta and ends up under Ako's skirt. Ako then tells her that he has been spending all his time at the library trying to stuff his brain with knowledge for the exams. Later that day, Rico is reading a book while Ako gets started on dinner and realizes that he still isn't back yet. They start talking about how his recent absence reminds them of a similar time in the past. Back then, they had just entered middle school and were testing out their uniforms in front of their parents. Cheta was heading out, so they asked for his opinion on the uniform, and he said the girls looked like drag queens on meth. Their parents tried to make them feel better, but his words had cut too deep, so they left. They started going to school without him for the first time and talked about how they always had fun by the river. The idea of not being with him all the time made Ako upset, but Rico told her that it was probably time for him to figure things out on his own. At school the next day, Ako's friends talk to her about boys and ask if she has a crush on anyone, but she tells them that she only has space in her heart for Cheta. Yuzuki hears her, so she starts thinking of a way to save Cheta from Ako. She then hears Rico saying something similar and thinks it's actually the other way around, so she starts freaking out. Rico and Ako's friends keep suggesting having an actual boyfriend, so the girls tell them about a time in middle school when their lockers kept getting flooded with letters. On the way home, Rico suggested giving the boys a chance, but Ako refused, claiming that Cheta was enough for her. Rico then reminded her that he was still avoiding them like the plague, so Ako decided to give it a shot. They gave multiple gentlemen chances to date them, but the boys traumatized them with their zero-riz pickup lines. On the way home, Rico meets Ako sitting by the road and joins her to talk about another part of their life in middle school. They once stalked Cheta and hid by a fence to watch him participate in a race. After initially falling at the start, he picked up the pace and ended up taking first place, which left both of them feeling hot on the inside. They both decide to accept that he had to stay away from them to be able to get into their high school. After a weird dream about the race and his sisters, Cheta wakes up screaming and loses all his aura points before heading to the locker to make it home early for once. Mikazuki stops him from leaving and asks why he keeps missing practice, so he tells her about his studies, but she starts pulling his arm and ends up pinned to the lockers. As she gets ready for a kiss, Naru shows up, gets terrified, and thinks he has no limits, so she runs away. Cheta tells Mikazuki to stop making a weird face and leaves, but on the way home, he sees the local shrine and decides to pay a visit. At the time, the girls are saying a prayer for him to pass the exams, but Rico starts intensely asking God to let her see his face again. He calls out to them, which leaves them shocked, and asks what they are praying for. Ako tells him they have been visiting the temple to pray for his success since he started studying. They tell him to say a prayer as well, so he climbs up and prays to pass his exams. They stop him and tell him about the offering and ceremonial clap, but he tells them it's just a formality since he doesn't believe in gods. They get sad and think he is going to get cursed for his lack of faith, so they remind him of the time he actually believed in praying. He prayed to be the one to marry both of them, but their dad said it was impossible. Cheta refused to give up on his dreams, so Rico and Ako told him to keep praying and started kissing him. Ako asks if they can kiss him again like old times, but even Rico is smart enough to know it could get them sent to a correctional facility. They then tell him about a good luck charm they wrote for him and take him to where they left it after their prayers back then. They tell him the shrine once belonged to a god of love, which was why he prayed to marry them both back then. They start looking through the charms and begin to realize that a lot of them are actually from boys who have been trying to clap them. Seeing the charms reminds Cheta of the time he broke the one he made for his marriage to them. He had just found out about the law against having 2 wives and couldn't hold back his tears, despite his dad's efforts to cheer him up. After looking through all the charms, Ako says it won't matter since he will be getting into their high school. He asks what they would do if he failed the exams, so Ako says she will probably end up settling for one of the boys at school. The thought of both of them getting their rice cakes clapped by strangers cuts deep, so he heads back to actually say a proper prayer. His seriousness reminds them of that time from middle school, but then he finishes praying and promises to get into their school so no one else can have them. They both get excited and grab hold of his arm to head home together. Days later at school, the boys spot a group of girls trying to have lunch and go crazy with the cultured daydreams they whip up in their minds. They try getting him to join them, but he refuses and acts like he is too civilized to be taking part in such activities. They start interrogating him about the kinds of things he gets up to with his sisters and accuse him of having eyes for them only. He denies the allegations and proves that he likes other girls by trying to twist off Miharu's melons. After realizing, he lets her mommy milkers hang and tries to apologize, but she shuts him up with a brain-juggling slap. That evening, he gets back home with her handprint still fresh on his face and snubs his sisters when they try to ask him about it. Riko's senses start tingling, so she tells Akko that a girl is most definitely involved, and they both start coming up with wild theories about the kind of situations he probably gets into at school. Meanwhile, Miharu cups her mega melons at home and starts thinking about Cheta. Later on, the girls try to stare into his soul while their dad watches and eventually asks if Cheta cheated on them. They ignore him and keep staring at Cheta, so he decides to turn on the TV, but that only makes matters worse for him. That night, he remembers what the boys told him at school and develops insomnia, so he starts thinking about Miharu's melons. He stops himself and tries to enlighten his mind, but the girls invade him with their plot. He fights back with the power of his inner eye, but he ends up thinking about Miharu's melons again. At school the next day, he slaps himself awake and decides to focus on studying instead, but then he meets Miharu at the library. At the time, Akko and Riko are at school thinking about him and start to picture him on a rainy date with a hottie from school. Miharu and Cheta both start taking glances at each other until she turns away from him and thinks about the rumors she hears of him being a shameless creep. Her bladder starts to fill up, so she gets up to leave, but the sight of him terrifies her, so she sits back down and struggles to hold it in. By then, his sisters start making their way to his school and convince themselves that their psycho behavior is born out of an innocent love for him. By the time they get to his school, Miharu reaches her breaking point and runs out just as Cheta was about to apologize for what he did to her melons. She feels relief while walking to the bathroom, but she sees him running towards her with a book and starts running away. He reads her name off it to get her to stop, but that only makes it worse, so she keeps running until the pea starts trying to burst out. He crashes into her and she tries to scream, but he holds her mouth shut because his sisters are in the same hallway looking for him. He pulls her into a classroom and the girls immediately sense him, so they head in to search it while he hides with Miharu in the locker. She subtly explains that she is about to lose bladder control, so he begs her to hold it in and waits until the girls leave, but he realizes that they might be locked in. He starts trying to break open the locker doors, but it starts to shake Miharu up. When he finally opens it, her floodgates burst open and she starts to cry, but it turns out to be her pee-induced delusion, so he escorts her to find a bathroom. She finally sees one, but then he hears his sisters and runs to the storage building to keep hiding. He tries to check if the coast is clear, but he sees someone coming to the door and heads back in to hide. After the security guard locks them in, Cheta tries to get the door open again, but his efforts go to waste until he spots a window and comes up with an idea. He makes her climb his shoulders to get up there, but he keeps wobbling and accidentally rams his head into her soaking floodgates. The next moment, he gets soaked by a steamy golden shower and hangs his shirt up to dry while she begs to be isekai'd from the sheer embarrassment. He starts cleaning up the pee, and she tries to stop him, but he insists it's no problem while secretly hiding the strange pleasure he feels from doing it. He tells her to take off her drenched underwear to avoid getting a cold and proceeds to sniff his hand when she's not looking. She immediately slaps the life out of him until he crashes into some tools and spots a second window. After both crawl out through the window, Cheta promises to keep everything that happened a secret and Miharu, shyly relieved, thanks him. But then, in a moment of confusion, she ends up showing him every inch of her fish lips, causing both of them extreme embarrassment. Later on, his sisters start heading home, but then Riko's senses start to tingle again. She and Akko spot him by the river and rush over to check on him. However, his bruised-up face literally scares the shit out of them, leaving them speechless as they try to figure out what happened. On a train, days later, Cheta tells the girls about a PC their dad got from his company and says he was hoping that it would be a game console. Riko calls him a child and says she should be thinking about getting on the internet. She starts listing out all the corn sites he could be visiting, but Akko stops her and tells him to keep dreaming about his games. They start talking about their plans to spend the day in Akiba and get super hyped about it, which leaves everyone on the train genuinely concerned. When they get there, Riko puts cat ears on Akko and tells her to act the part, but she refuses. Cheda starts begging her to do it, so she reluctantly acts like a cat and becomes an instant celebrity, while Mikazuki, who also came to the town, gets confused. Moments later, they start window shopping, but all the activities going on start to make Akko feel sick, and Riko says she shouldn't have stayed up throughout the previous night. Cheda asks why she didn't sleep, but they both change the topic. They had actually spent the night trying to get past the restrictions their dad put on the PC to stop them from watching Korn. They both took turns coming up with cultured words and hoped one would work, but by dawn they gave up, and Riko suggested getting an arrow game. Akko told her they were stupid, but Riko got pissed and made her apologize to the Global Association of Gooners before saying that they had to get their hands on a copy so they could finally become real women. Cheda gets busy looking through some old games he played as a kid, so the girls discuss tactics to keep him from figuring out their true intentions. Akko thinks he will become disgusted by her if he finds out, but Riko thinks he will finally take it as a sign to get extremely freaky. Akko tells her to go get the game while she distracts Cheda, so Riko sneaks up to the adult section to start the mission. Akko pulls Cheda away, but he gets suspicious and starts asking a lot of questions, so she takes him to a cosplay store. She tells him to pick an outfit for her, but he starts fantasizing about all the choices, so she makes him get into the dresser to put on an outfit she picked for him. Moments later, she gets tired of waiting, so she pulls the covers open and almost blinds him with an outfit that leaves her cakes wide open. She gets inside to help and starts struggling to take off his pants. In the next booth, Yuzuki finishes putting on her outfit and gets tired of hearing their scuffle, so she takes a broom and goes to shun them, but she sees Akko's face buried in his dingleberries and starts tweaking. The moment Akko takes a look and recognizes her, she runs away and hides, praying that Akko forgets ever seeing her in cosplay. She takes a moment to plan her next move before heading out. Shortly after that, Riko looks through the games and finally finds one that matches her freak. She reaches for it but ends up struggling with another otaku until she sees that it's Yuzuki. Yuzuki experiences another moment of shock before getting into character and asking Riko why she is shopping in the adult section. Riko asks her the exact same question, so she claims to be doing double research to protect her students. Another otaku tries to get the game, but Yuzuki shatters his jawbone and says she plans to buy the game. She realizes that Riko hurt her, so she just grabs the game and runs off. By then, Cheda starts getting worried and decides to go find Riko, but Akko stops him and goes to get her. After Yuzuki pays for the game, Riko starts asking her why she bought it if she truly isn't interested. Akko catches up to them and also asks Yuzuki about the cosplay outfit, so she decides to come clean. Just then, Cheda meets up with them and introduces himself to her. She remembers him from the dressing room and thinks about the rumors she had heard of his relationship with Akko and Riko, so she pulls out the game to see why Riko wants it and gets traumatized. Cheda tries to pick up the game and also gets shocked by what he sees. He asks the girls why they are trying to increase their creepiness, and Yuzuki decides to use the situation to her advantage by activating teacher mode. She tells them it's wrong to try and clap their brother, but they tell her he is only their stepbrother, which apparently makes it okay. She then asks Cheda how he feels about their feelings for him, and he says he actually likes it. She realizes that he is the problem, but the store employee announces that there are more copies of the game. The girls think of a way to get it despite him being there, but then they realize that he has vanished with Yuzuki. In a room somewhere else, Cheda asks what she wants and protects his glizzy in case she is a PDF, but she starts talking to him about his relationship with the girls. She tries to tell him how their relationship could get the girls in trouble, but the shop's owner comes in to tell her about their most popular cosplay outfit. Yuzuki switches to an R. Kelly-style fantasy, where Cheda gets into the costume and empties his clips into her, so she gets the costume before continuing her lecture. She barely makes a full sentence when the couple next door starts making loud happy noises that distract them both. Cheda gets fed up with her self-righteous yapping and tells her to stick to teaching math before walking toward the door. She tries to stop him and ends up pulling him down on herself. Just then, the girls catch them and take them both outside to demand an explanation from Yuzuki. Mikazuki shows up and greets them all before asking if Yuzuki troubled them, revealing that they are actually sisters. She tells them that Yuzuki was getting the game for her because she was too small to get into the store. The girls ask about the incident with Cheda, so Mikazuki explains that Yuzuki gets really clumsy at times, so they decide to forgive her. After saying goodbye to each other, the girls get on the train with Cheta, who immediately hits the snooze button while Mikazuki heads home to start a cultured photo shoot with Yuzuki. Yuzuki starts to complain, so Mikazuki reminds her that it was her little performance that stopped Heida's sisters from calling the cops, which would have resulted in the whole world knowing that Yuzuki is an extremely down bad. On the first weekend of summer break, Yuzuki practices her twerking while looking through her fridge and sees that she needs to start being financially responsible. She takes a look around to see if she has all the figurines and collector's items she needs, and also realizes that being financially responsible might not be a current priority. Meanwhile, Cheta is on a run with the track team and ends up taking last place, so he stops to catch his breath. Mikazuki crashes into him and thanks him for showing up despite having to prepare for his exams. As a reward, she starts to tickle him until Tota shows up and demands to know what they are doing. Before he can explain, Tota demands that he call his sisters to hang out at the pool because it's their last summer break in middle school. Moments later, Akko gets the call from him and agrees to bring the swimsuit. But Riko finds it suspicious that Tota wants to tag along. Akko starts giving her suggestions on other ways to spend her weekend, but she has already brought out swimsuits to choose from. Tota thanks Cheta for inviting them by offering him a latest edition Corn magazine, but Cheta pretends to be an alpha who has no interest in such items. Tota then decides to keep it, but Cheta tells him to hand it over so he can do some research in his spare time. At the time, Yuzuki is outside an arcade trying to decide between risking her bank balance on gamble and acting like a civilized adult. She starts going crazy and scares off the locals, but then she sees Cheta's sisters and follows them to the park. She sees Mikazuki there and thinks Cheta wants to take them all to Pound Town, so she races to get in, but the ticket price nearly gives her a heart attack. She remembers her mission to protect Cheta and his sisters from themselves and reluctantly gets a ticket. Moments later, Tota gets excited to see the girls, but when they show up in their swimsuits, his brain blows up. Mikazuki asks for Cheta's opinion on her swimsuit, so he takes a close look at it and realizes that she actually has melons, but Akko and Riko pull her aside to fill up the space with pads. Cheta realizes that they may also be using pads, and Akko tries to deny the obvious, but Riko proudly shows them that she is going commando and deep fries Tota's brain cells again. While they spend most of the day having fun and doing any activity they can think of, Yuzuki struggles with the price of the swimsuits and starts having another breakdown. She decides to head inside without a swimsuit, but after seeing the girls heading in her direction, she panics and runs into the ladies' room. They both come in after her and start talking about how Mikazuki is stopping them from having fun with Cheta with her excessive clinging. Yuzuki tries to lean in to hear them, but she slams her head into the door, and the girls think she is a peeping Tom that snuck into the ladies' room. After getting on the seat, Yuzuki hears them planning something and tries peeping from the top, but then they toss a bucket of water, and the boys hear her scream from the poolside. She tries to open the door so they can stop, but they bust out the hose and keep on spraying her until she starts making happy noises. By then, Cheta and the others show up, so they take her outside to make her explain herself. She claims to have just been looking out for them, but the girls ask why she cares so much about something so trivial since she has probably also done it. Her reaction to that statement makes them realize that she is actually inexperienced, but then she starts sneezing from the cold water. Tota gets back with Cheta's gym bag, so he offers to give her his swimsuit, but she has already started taking off her socks and sends their degenerative brain cells into overdrive. Miharu is in the locker room at the time, and the sound of Cheta's voice immediately makes her weak in the knees. Later on, Cheta apologizes to Yuzuki for giving her the sweaty tracksuit he wore earlier on, but she says it's okay and promises to wash it before giving it back to him. After thanking him for the tracksuit, Yuzuki starts heading home with Mikazuki, and Riko wonders how they have managed to stay together despite both clearly needing therapy. Later on, Yuzuki finishes having a shower and remembers to wash the tracksuit, but the usually disgusting smell of boy sweat starts to do something to her brain. She finds the armpit and takes a deep whiff to soak in the smell, but then she tries to stop herself before things get out of hand. Her intrusive thoughts start to take over, so she decides to put on the tracksuit with nothing else underneath. She imagines teaching Cheta, but he gets distracted by her dump truck, so she goes to his table and makes him take her socks as a punishment. After her alarm wakes her up the next day, she remembers what she did with the tracksuit and starts taking it off to return it the way he asked. But then she sees the love juices she spilled on it and decides to hold on to it for a little longer. while Cheta spends the rest of his summer at a cram school for the high school exams. On his way home that evening, he sees people making preparations for the summer festival. Later on, Riko is in his room performing what appears to be a top-level horse riding technique. Thankfully, it's just a massage, but just as she makes him lay on his back for the actual ride, Akko comes in, and he gets scared, thinking his life is over. Surprisingly, she simply puts his food on the table and tells him to continue the good work before leaving with Riko to let him get back to his studies. Their parents sense the weird reduction in their creepshow activities and guess that it's because of his exams. While Cheta keeps reading, Akko gets to work on a yukata for the festival, while Riko starts letting the intrusive thoughts she has been hiding slip out. The next day, they both start trying to rip him apart while arguing about who gets to take him to the festival. So he tells them that it's not possible for him to take both of them out on the same night. They come up with an idea to solve that problem, and he ends up tied to a surgical table while they turn on a saw to share him equally between each other. After he wakes up from the nightmare, they show him their yukatas. Once they open the door, his friends start trying to blind them with pictures, so they shut the door. Toda and the boys beg for more shots so they can make an album for the girls, but they refuse to open the door again. By sundown, they get to the festival, and the girls start trying to rip him in half because they both want to see different stands. Miharu also gets to the festival and starts looking for her friends while struggling to keep her melons from escaping the yukata. She hears the girls arguing over Cheta, and the memory of what happened in the shed makes her bladder fill up again, so she tries to leave, but a parade carries her along. They also pass through Cheta and the girls, but after they march through, he ends up with Akko. He tries to find Riko, but she tells him not to worry about her so they can focus on enjoying the festival together. He decides to go along with her plan, and she gets cotton candy along the way. Seeing the way she eats it makes him wonder what else her mouth can do. She offers him some, but he rejects it, so she reminds him of a time in the past when he begged to eat some cotton candy with the both of them. He refuses to believe that he was such a simp back then, but she sees some chicks and gets distracted. She tries to play with one, but it gets into her dress, and she starts to freak out. She tells him to get it out, so he reaches in, but his hand gets stuck on her melon. She starts getting excited and tells him to go lower, but then Riko reveals that it was actually her hand. Miharu sees them again and starts struggling with her bladder, but then a chick gets stuck between her melons and terrifies her. The parade swallows her again and also marches into Cheta and the girls, but this time he ends up with Riko. She takes him into the woods and he starts asking her why, so she asks if he is scared. He denies having such feelings, so she reminds him of a festival years ago where he kept begging them to take him back because he was scared of the dark. He claims to be over it, so she leans in and asks if he wants to find somewhere deeper while giving him a peek at her goods. Seeing her baby face and melons leaves him brain dead, so she drags him along for a good time in the woods. At the time, Yuzuki walks through the festival searching for signs of cultured activity and decides to check in between stands. She sees Riko dragging Cheta deeper into the woods and immediately runs to catch up to them, but Riko sees her coming and takes off running with him. She keeps chasing, but then the parade blocks her off, so she takes a moment to remind herself of the importance of being a Karen. She gets hiked up and grabs a flag from a stand before charging into the parade. Moments later, she lays on the grass after nearly being sent to her maker and starts having a discussion with an imagination of her figurine. It makes her believe in herself again, so she starts plotting new ways to stop Cheta's plans. The parade leaves him with a chick instead of Riko, but then he sees another one coming with Mikazuki on the carriage. She tells him about becoming the year's festival princess and asks if he likes the outfit, so he takes a minute to think of a good compliment and calls her cute. At the time, Miharu gets to a public restroom and prays that it gets to her turn before she loses control. She sees Cheta running towards her with Mikazuki's parade hot on his tails, so she also runs to escape. He finds a bench and tries to catch his breath, but then his sisters finally find him and they start roasting each other for looking homeless. Miharu hears them and decides to find a secret spot to let it out while Cheta and the girls talk and wait to see the fireworks. The chick tries to escape from Cheta, so he tries to catch it, but he ends up staring right at Miharu's snail as she gets ready to open her floodgates. She sees him and turns red before telling him to stop looking, but for some reason he ends up on his knees watching as she stands and waters the ground beneath her box. When she finishes, the wind starts to blow and gets him even more excited to watch while everyone at the festival enjoys the fireworks like sensible people. His sisters start wondering why he is not back yet, but then he shows up and looks like he got stung by 100 bees. With summer finally coming to an end, Cheta starts his last days of studying to ace the high school exams, but Akko interrupts his flow to get him for dinner. At the table moments later, his dad asks about the studies, and he tells them about how nervous he is, so his dad suggests getting lessons from Akko again. The still vivid images about her plotful lessons excite him, but he decides against it so he can fully lock in. Riko tries to offer herself, but Akko reminds her that only one of them has good brain cells. Their mom asks if he has gotten a good luck charm for the exams and suggests going to the temple to make it, but he tells her that it's pointless since every other student going for the exams probably has one. He then says that he would need a special charm created just for him to be able to get support from the gods. The girls get an idea, so Riko heads back to her room to meditate while Akko watches him study and keeps complimenting him. He thanks her and says that he needs to get in the zone, so she steps out to make him tea, and he immerses himself in the books. Moments later, Riko walks in and gives him a headband she made specially for him, and he excitedly puts it on. Akko gets back and sees that she has been replaced, so she leads Riko to take care of him. She gets back several minutes later with a bowl of food for him and has a stare down with Riko to assert dominance. He starts gobbling down the food like a starved orphan, so she promises to make him a Michelin star meal every night and starts making Riko jealous. She heads out again to get him some apples for dessert, and Riko starts kicking him under the table while calling him stupid for giving all his attention to Akko. He starts fighting back as well, but she suddenly stops and starts talking funny. He gets confused and asks if she is okay, but she keeps talking weirdly and makes happy noises until he realizes that his foot is on her snail. He tries to stop, but she pulls it back and starts stroking. He tries to escape the table, but her grip gets stronger, and she keeps rubbing the snail until he feels its slime. She apologizes for soiling his sock, so he stops trying to run and watches as her expression changes. She gets shy and tells him to keep watching while also saying that he will have to take responsibility for what happens to her snail. They keep going, but then Akko gets back with the apples, so they stop and try to hide their expressions. She notices the sweat leaking out of their pores and tells Cheta to get out of the table for some fresh air, but his fully charged sword stops him from even considering it. Riko notices and starts sizing it up with her toes, so he takes the initiative to continue playing with her snails. Akko watches them in confusion until the table starts to shake, and she realizes what they have been up to. Outside the temple the next day, she tells Riko to stop distracting him and asks what she would do if he fails. Riko says she will make him feel better with her melons, so Akko keeps scolding her as they enter and see all the students eating to say a prayer. They see Toda at the top and head over to ask if he is praying for the exams. He tells them that it's the only way to make up for his lack of brain power and shows them the charms he has collected for good luck. He runs off to get back to reading, and Akko says they don't have enough time to get Cheta more charms, so Riko suggests finding a really good one. At school later on, Akko is doing some research on it when Riko shows up to help out. Riko finds one said to have a lot of benefits, so they read through and see that it requires pubes to work. Riko subtly asks if Akko even has pubes, and Akko loudly defends her womanhood. That night, she is in the tub thinking about it, and remembers Riko teasing her about likely only having enough to count. She gets out and decides to check for herself, while Riko dries her hair. Akko suddenly bursts in and starts crying over Riko because her pubes are actually countable, so Riko tells her to cheer up because they both have the same problem. To be sure, Riko gets on her knees to check and starts laughing at Akko because it isn't pink. She stops laughing and promises to help her out, so they both get coffee, and Riko suggests making the charm with both of their pubes because Cheta wouldn't want to carry two of them around. She then suggests having him pull one out for each of them, and Akko immediately takes a trip to Delulu land. He carries her to the bed and gets ready to take one out, but it hurts, so she tells him to go slowly. Riko finally calls her back to reality and asks why she is getting creepier than usual. She tries calling Riko a creep as well, but Riko proudly tells her that she had always been one. Akko decides to go pull one out in the bathroom, while Riko gets on the bed to yank it out like a G afterwards. Riko puts it all together, and Akko prays to the god of hair for pube restoration. After putting it in a bag, the embarrassment finally catches up to them. They both take it to Cheta, and he tries to look inside, but they stop him and terrify him with a warning to never open it up. He thanks them and gives it a kiss that they mysteriously feel in the special spot. The next day, he hangs it on his bag and says he wants everyone to see it before running away, leaving them with a mysterious case of windy plots. 2 days before the exam, Cheta gets a terrible fever, and the girls start to freak out over it. He apologizes for getting himself sick, but they tell him not to worry before blowing him kisses and making up stories about also being sick to skip school. They spend the day doing everything for him, hoping it will make him feel better, but that night, they check again and see that his condition is still the same. He tells them to give up and says he will probably end up repeating the grade because of the sickness, and Akko almost slaps his teeth out, but she restrains herself and tells him to stop being negative. She reminds him of everything he has been through for the sake of passing the exams and promises to make sure he feels better in time to write it. Akko suddenly starts kissing him, and it starts getting intense, so Riko punches them both in the mouth and asks why she can't control herself. Akko explains that she is simply trying to take his cold away with her mouth and claims Riko doesn't love him enough to do the same. Riko pushes her off and starts to kiss him, but Akko pulls her away and they both start arguing about it. He tells them to stop, but then Riko sees that he is sweating and starts cleaning him up with her tongue. Akko asks why she doesn't just use a towel like a sane person, but Riko says she wants to take care of him like a cat would do to her kitten. The next moment, they both find the tips of his melons and start trying to lick it off. He starts squirming, and they realize that his little Johnny has grown. Akko demands to know what she told him, but Riko claims to just be cleaning up his ear, so Akko joins her to do the same, and they keep going until midnight. He tells them to stop, but Akko shuts him up with a kiss, and he realizes that they both really want to take his sickness away, so he lays back and lets them finish what they started. On the day of the exam, he wakes up full of energy and says goodbye to them, but the girls, who finally succeeded in their mission to cure his fever, struggle to wish him luck with their immune systems on fire. They give him tips to make sure he passes, and he thanks them for all their help but also takes a moment to think before saying he loves them. He runs off, and the shock of hearing that phrase from him blows both of their minds. He is on the bus later on and gets terrified when he sees Mikazuki cheering for him with a banner. She tries to follow the bus but crashes into some people and almost tumbles into traffic. Afterwards, he gets to the high school and meets Toda, who immediately asks if his sisters are the reason his sickness went away. The question catches him off guard, and Toda immediately understands his reaction, so they start praying that he fails while heading inside. After he gets everything set for the exam, Yuzuki enters the class to give them instructions, but then she sees Cheta and nearly craps her pants. She imagines him starting a harem with the girls and decides to make him fail, but she remembers her goal of becoming the best underpaid teacher on Earth and gets inspiration from her imaginative figurine. The students start asking for another invigilator, so she stops going nuts and hands over their scripts. Cheta gets ready to start and squeezes the pew charm while the girls struggle with their leaking noses and hope he is doing okay. They almost start to argue again, but the fever takes their energy away, so they start heading up and talk about the time they were also writing the high school entrance exams. Akko forgot her ID and started freaking out, but then Cheta showed up and told her it was on the porch. She kept crying, so he gave her a pep talk to calm her down, and Riko told her to stop being so careless. He then gave Riko her ID and said it never even made it out of her room. After talking about it, Riko asks Akko why she is in her bed, and she says it's because they shouldn't be separated during a sickness. While they both start sleeping together, Cheta remembers all the lessons they gave him and annihilates the questions like a supercomputer on coke. After the exams, Mihura reassures herself of the answers she wrote, but then she hears Cheta with his friends and loses bladder control. After getting back home that evening, he gets shocked seeing them together and thinks about all the cultured things they had put him through over the last few months. After telling them how much he loves them for all their help and support, he gives them each a kiss on the cheek. He realizes that they might be awake and freaks out for sounding like a simp, but they keep snoring, so he relaxes and heads out so they can rest. They stop pretending, and Akko asks why they didn't take the opportunity to have a three-way, but Riko starts crying, and it brings Akko to tears as well. In a dream, Cheta gets congratulated on passing the exams by his sisters, and Toda also shows up with the boys. His parents commend him on making them proud, and Mikazuki cheers him on with Yuzuki before his sisters soak him in champagne. It suddenly starts getting steamy, and he realizes that he is actually getting soaked by Miharu's apple juice. He wakes up scared and makes sure it was actually a dream before realizing that Riko and Akko are grabbing his glizzy and freaking out. That morning, he starts heading down but hears something going on in the kitchen and gets curious. He tries to open the door, but Riko pins him to the wall with a pillow while Akko shuts the door to keep him from seeing. He asks why, and they tell him it's because an exterminator is taking care of their bug problem. Moments later, Akko starts asking him a bunch of questions to make sure he has all he needs, while Riko monitors the wind to find the right direction for good luck. He asks if they are nervous to hear the announcement results, so Akko tells him that her dream of finally going to high school with him depends on the results. Riko starts arguing with her for not including her in the dream, so he separates them and tells them to stop acting like little kids. They think he has suddenly become a mature gentleman, but after a few steps, his nervousness trips him up. On the way there, he notices Akko's scarf and asks about it, so she tells him that it's a lucky item she got especially for his results. Riko gets jealous and pulls him closer to tell him about a special item she wants to show him back home. He gets confused, so she describes it to him in detail and makes his face turn red. Just then, they see a billboard ad that sounds like bad luck for his results, so the girls try to counter by talking about the good omens they saw earlier on. After another bad luck ad, they run into a bunch of black cats and crows, so Akko closes his eyes to protect him while Riko kicks all the innocent creatures away. Meanwhile, a little dog gets lost and ends up in front of their house as the mailman gets there. Afterwards, they get to the temple and ring the ceremonial bell before saying a prayer to ward off evil spirits, but as they start leaving, the bell drops and cracks open. Outside the high school, moments later, students gather around to check their results, and while most of them get excited after seeing that they passed, a few brain-dead otakus get heartbroken. Cheta finally finds the courage to look for his number, so his sisters start saying their last prayers while he searches for his number. After passing where his number should have been, his heart sinks as he realizes the awful truth of his failure. Toda and the boys become ecstatic after seeing that they passed, so they start asking Cheta and the girls about their celebration plans until they sense what happened. They all take turns getting them gifts to make up for Cheta's lack of brain cells and run away to avoid the awkward vibes. As the three of them struggle to understand what happened, Yuzuki comes out with a final sheet of results and sees them talking about Cheta's failure. She tries to check on them, but they get mad and tell her to scram. She tries again, but they get all up in her face and cause her to fall with her pantyhose in the wind. Mikazuki takes over with a symbol that she uses to hype Cheta up for passing until she realizes what happened and switches to a cheer-up song to make his pain go away. The girls tell Yuzuki to get her sister under control, but then they see Cheta heading out and run after him. Yuzuki consults her master to get some advice and forgets that her rice cakes are visible for all to see. While the dog from earlier starts heading home with mail for Cheta in his mouth, Cheta takes a very long and dark walk home with the girls following close behind him. Miharu stays out until evening searching for her dog until it starts to snow, and by then, Cheta gets back home and sees all the decorations and food the girls had prepared to celebrate his success. He stays silent, so they tell him it was meant to be a surprise and apologize for not waiting until they were sure he had passed. They both start to cry and apologize for not preparing him enough for the exams, so he turns to face them and makes a fist to punish them. They expect a beating, but he gently places his hands on their heads and they look up to see him smiling. He thanks them for all the help and training they had given him for the exam and tells them that it's his fault for not working hard enough. After apologizing for wasting all of their effort, he promises to try harder next year, but says they will only be able to spend a year together. Hearing him talk like that after everything changes the entire mood, but his belly starts to rumble, so he takes a look at the food and asks if they can still have a celebration. The girls agree and switch into maid outfits to pour up the wine, and they all toast to him passing the exams next year. While they spend the rest of the night partying, Miharu starts heading to their house. Shortly after, the girls pass out on the couch with him, but then the doorbell rings. He goes to answer it and is surprised to see Miharu. She hands him the mail and explains that Kenta is actually her dog. She lost him during a walk and kept searching for him around the neighborhood until she went back home and saw him trying to bury the mail in her backyard. She apologizes to him for getting his mail dirty, but he barely hears her as he opens it up. After pulling the letter out, his eyes light up as he sees that he was actually put on the waiting list for acceptance. After they left earlier on, Yuzuki had put up the last sheet that had the names of students on the waiting list. She explained that a letter had also been sent to their houses just to make sure they knew. Keita gets excited and gives Miharu a tight hug for bringing the letter to him, and she also hugs him back. The girls come out to check on him and are shocked to see them together, so Miharu pushes him away and runs off with tears in her eyes. Keita forgets about her and excitedly tells his sisters about the waiting list, but it takes them a few minutes to process the information he is giving them. When their brains finally connect, they hug him with excitement and congratulate him on passing. And he also thanks them for believing in him. Days later, Cheta officially graduates from middle school and meets up with the boys outside to celebrate. But they are mainly excited over the fact that they finally get to be in the same high school as his sisters. They start teasing him about making it onto the acceptance list at the last minute, making it sound like he didn't actually study for the exams. He tells them to stop and starts thinking about what would have happened if Miharu hadn't brought his letter. He thinks about thanking her again, but then she shows up and congratulates him on graduating. She then apologizes for what happened again, but his friends interrupt them and start threatening to tell his sisters that he has found a new love interest. Just then, they show up and almost give him a heart attack before they start arguing over who gets his second button. They realize that there are no buttons to begin with and start demanding answers, as he already promised to keep it for them. He explains that a bunch of juniors snatched them from him and starts reaching into his pocket to give them something else. Mikazuki suddenly shows up and also starts asking why he didn't keep the button he promised her. They all get upset with him, so his friends swoop in to offer their buttons, but the girls ignore them. They rip off the buttons for them, but Riko responds by kicking them to Mars. Akko comes up with an idea to leave everyone satisfied and makes them all write what they want from him so she can create a game where they all get a chance to pick one of the random gifts. They all start writing, but when it gets to Miharu's turn, she asks why they are forcing her to be a part of their games. They tell her that it's going to be her last chance at getting another hug, so she writes and Akko takes the pen to start tracing. She ends up picking the option to play with his collar and regrets ever coming up with the game in the first place. While she starts threatening Miharu for adding a PG-13 option, Riko starts tracing and ends up giving Mikazuki the right to get her skirt flipped by him. She excitedly tells him about her plan to activate his sword with it, but the girls remember all the things they had already done to him and feel certain that seeing some mini cakes will do nothing to his messed up head. He also gets down and expects the average, but then he pulls it up and gets his brain scrambled by the divine light of her box. While Mikazuki explains that she wanted to give him something to remember, Miharu wonders how she ended up with a bunch of sickos. After Mikazuki explains herself, the girls realize that she has the potential to become their worst nightmare. Riko takes the next turn for herself and ends up with the option of kissing him, which Akko says was the option she had put down for herself. She pushes Riko to get her kiss, but after seeing the others eagerly watching them, she gets shy and caves. They check the option left for Miharu and start threatening to rip out her melons for saving the best one for herself. Cheta stops them from attacking her and tries to defend her honor, but he grabs her melon by accident. After he releases it, she asks why he stopped, and he starts getting shy. His sisters sense the tension between them and decide to reduce her time with him in the shed to a minute. But Mikazuki tells them that it's against the rules of the game. Moments later, they both get inside and remember the golden shower incident. She asks if he does cultured things with his sisters a lot, but he denies ever thinking about it and says he only wants to do it with someone in his grade. She gets the hint, but her bladder starts to fill up, so she struggles to keep it under control while he keeps looking for ways to make his intentions known. He starts talking about getting into high school, and she realizes that he still doesn't know they will see each other after enrolling. He thanks her again for bringing him the letter and gets up to offer her a handshake, so she tries to stand up and slips. He tries to save her and somehow ends up with his face in her melons. He pulls himself up, but his knee starts pressing her snail, and the girls open the door to say their time is up. But seeing him standing over her like that leaves them all too stunned to speak. Back home that night, their dad asks about the graduation ceremony, but Cheta senses the bloodlust spilling from his sisters as they think about Miharu, who immediately senses the danger she is in. His dad tells him about his glorious days as a middle school harem lord and asks if he is ready to finally become a man. Cheta refuses to answer and drinks a glass of tequila without realizing it. The talk about cherry popping causes his dad to schedule some alone time with their mom, and that gives his sisters an unholy idea. After dinner, Cheta changes and starts feeling the effects of the tequila, so he gets into bed to sleep. Moments later, the girls both come out in Victoria's Secret night sets. He then relives the moment his buttons were snatched by a bunch of juniors. He takes out a single button for both of his sisters and reaches out for the jacket while still dreaming. After the girls see the button, he starts mumbling about how he doesn't want to choose between the both of them. While they start remembering the years they have spent together, their mom wraps up the tickets she got as a graduation gift for him, while Toda celebrates his graduation in a way that truly speaks to him. The girls decide to stop trying to pop his cherry and give him kisses instead. At the start of the new semester, he gets dressed and makes them blush with his new look. They take his hand to walk him like old times, but he pulls his hands away and says he is too old for such beta activities. Their faces melt his heart, so he decides to grant their wish, and they gladly walk him to the start of a new and extremely cultured chapter of their lives together. Will Miharu's mega melons be enough to pull Cheta away from his Alabama sisters, or will he find a way to satisfy all his girls by creating a high school harem? That's it for this video. Leave a thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.